And congratulations for these 12 years of extraordinary achievements that the Nepal Economic Forum has made. You asked me to talk about pandemics all over the world and their impact and our future outlook. Let me say, during the past 2 years, the COVID pandemic has dominated all of our lives here in Nepal and all over the world. I should take out the, yeah. But COVID is only one among 4 pandemics facing Nepal and the world. A pandemic is defined as a dangerous disease that occurs over a wide geographic area, cutting across countries and regions, and that causes large-scale disease, death, disruption of social disruption, and economic loss. If we follow that definition, besides COVID-19, there are 3 other pandemics that fit that definition. And those are the specter of climate change, the growing inequality in the world, and bad governance. All of those are like pandemics too. And all these pandemics are mutually reinforcing. As we heard at the COP26 conference in Glasgow, and as we have experienced right here in Nepal, climate change and global warming are causing unseasonal rains, floods, droughts that impact on our human habitat, food systems, health, education, and livelihoods of millions of people. Growing inequality of income, wealth, and asset has also become a pandemic-like universal phenomenon, and COVID has exacerbated it. Millions of people have become poorer because of COVID, but COVID has also been a windfall for many billionaires who have become multi-billionaires. The economic stimulus and increased demand for diagnostics, PPE, oxygen, vaccines, and medicines have made the owners, shareholders, and brokers of pharmaceutical and biotech industries filthy rich. Dozens of executives of such industries in China, in India, in Canada, in Germany, in the USA, and elsewhere have become billionaires, COVID billionaires. Last year, at the height of the COVID crisis, we saw a record 500 new billionaires added to the list of already more than 2,000 billionaires in the world. And 5 million more people were added to the list of 50 million millionaires in the world, including dozens of them here in Nepal. The revelations we saw in the Panama Papers and the Pandora's Papers were just the tip of the iceberg. Added to all of this is vaccine inequity. With less than 7% of people in Africa fully vaccinated, we have had over 70% are vaccinated in the OECD countries. The big talk we had of treating COVID vaccines as global public good became almost farcical as many rich countries hoarded more vaccines than they needed, while the poor countries waited for their leftovers. And how about bad governance as a pandemic? The COVID crisis has led to many authoritarian leaders and even some democratically elected leaders imposing all kinds of harsh restrictions and violating people's human rights. In the name of public health, many governments are using brute force to crush opponents, to settle scores, and restrict press freedom. According to Freedom House and Reporters Without Borders, there has been a steady decline in democratic freedoms around the world. As we are learning the hard way, tackling one pandemic is hard enough. Tackling all 4 pandemics simultaneously is an unprecedented challenge of our times. But tackle them we must. We must because the rewards of doing so will unleash a virtuous cycle of building a better future for our children and grandchildren. And failing to do so will bring unprecedented gloom and doom to humanity. So what should be done? Sadly, there are no magic solutions or simple formulas. But there are solid recommendations to tackle each of these pandemics proposed by high-level commissions of eminent personalities. All that is lacking is strong political commitment from the world's political leaders. At the global level, the Independent Panel on Pandemic Preparedness and Response, co-chaired by the former Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark, has come up with 7 major systemic recommendations to stop future outbreaks of infectious diseases from becoming catastrophic pandemics. We don't have the time today for me to elaborate on those recommendations, but suffice it to say that let us just follow those 7 recommendations of the panel, which provides a detailed roadmap to prevent and to cope with future pandemics. At the national level, here in Nepal, we have learned the hard way some lessons on what to do and what not to do. Some of the key lessons to me include build a much stronger and more responsive health system. Ensure that the whole of government, not just the Ministry of Health, is mobilized in times of pandemics. And when I say the whole of government, I want to specifically emphasize the need to mobilize our 100,000 strong Nepal army much more effectively to help tackle pandemics and other disasters. Because after all, human security is the foundation for national security. Also, while focusing on pandemics, let us not neglect routine health services such as childhood immunization, maternal health, nutrition, and sanitation, which still cause far higher mortality and morbidity on a regular basis than the pandemic. And finally, just ensure that education of children is not unduly or inequitably disrupted over a long period of time. Turning to the pandemic of climate change. At the global level, what is needed is to honestly honor the commitments that were made in Paris in 2015 and whatever commitments will come out of COP26 that ends today. The world's best minds have worked on these issues, taking into account the latest scientific evidence and the political realities that prevail in the world. There is no need for second-guessing their recommendations other than to take account of the views and voices and aspirations of the younger generation, who have been amazingly active and providing leadership in what they rightly call the climate justice movement. In the case of Nepal, it is true, but rather trite, to say that Nepal suffers greatly from the impact of global warming, although our own global carbon footprint is negligible. But that attitude of blaming others and playing victim, to me, is a lazy way of dealing with the issue. While we have no control over what the rest of the world does, we must take responsibility for what we ourselves can do and must do. It is good that our Prime Minister committed in Glasgow that Nepal aims to reach net zero carbon emission by 2045. But can't we do better than that? I think we can and ought to be even more ambitious and specific. Because except for firewood, all our fossil fuels, petrol, diesel, LP gas, they are all imported. Why can't we switch from fossil fuels to electric vehicles, electric cooking stoves, electric heating and cooling systems in a more aggressive and determined manner? I commend our energy minister these days, who is encouraging this kind of switching to electric vehicles and other things. But here again, I would urge a whole-of-government approach for an accelerated electrification of our transport, industry, and domestic fuel consumption. And let us do so fast and furiously before Nepal's notorious cartels and syndicates thwart this effort to electrification. On combating inequality, there again are numerous recommendations by organizations ranging from the United Nations to OECD and scholars like Thomas Piketty and Joseph Stiglitz and many others. Among the most compelling reports with specific recommendation to drastically reduce inequality, I would particularly commend the ones from Oxfam. Every year for the past 10 years, Oxfam has presented to the World Economic Council in Davos shocking statistics of growing and grotesque inequality in the world, along with very specific recommendations on how to tackle it. Its latest report on the vulnerability, on the inequality virus, contains a roadmap for tackling the pandemic by ending extreme inequality and providing essential services for all. Oxfam has also produced a very nice report on fighting inequality in Nepal. It recommends several steps to tackle inequality and put Nepal on track for a more prosperous future. But given our culture of cartels and syndicates patronized by political parties in virtually all sectors, I do not see the gap between the rich and the poor narrowing in the near future. On the contrary, I see the gap growing. The most we can hope for in the short term is to protect the poor from further impoverishment through investment in better quality healthcare, education, gainful employment at home and abroad, and some measure of social protection. In the long term, ensuring good governance remains the essential foundation for reducing inequality through targeted macroeconomic and social justice policies, more progressive taxation, and pro-poor economic growth. For far too long, in Nepal, we have sought ideological solutions to our development challenges through multiple political revolutions. In the past 7 decades, we have tried all forms of governments and all kinds of ideologies. And there is not that much to show in terms of great progress being made. Perhaps the time has come for us to forget ideologies and follow common sense, and learn from the pragmatic experience and lessons from some of our more successful Southeast Asian neighbors. To do that, we will need to turn to our younger generation, the digital generation, who are not mesmerized by the ideological slogans of their elders, but who are increasingly connected to the rest of the world. They will show us how to harness the positive power of globalization for their own growth and for the growth of our nation. Sujitji, I know my time is up, so let me conclude by referring to your own excellent book, Unleashing the Bajra, in which you hit the nail on the head when you speak about the need for social transformation, not through political revolution, but by inculcating more ethical and egalitarian values in the hearts and minds of our children from their earliest childhood. Indeed, the practice of good governance must start from our own homes by inculcating a sense of social responsibility and ethical behavior in our daily lives that our children can emulate. Thank you.